Suffering of Pride from The Art of Communicating, page 100. There is a well-known Vietnamese story about a young couple who suffered deeply because they didn't practice mindful communication. The husband went off to war and left his pregnant wife behind. 3 years later, when he was released from the army, his wife came to the village gate to welcome him and brought along their little boy. It was the first time the man had seen his child. When the young couple saw each other, they could not hold back the tears of joy. They were so grateful that the young man had survived and come home. In Vietnam, there is a tradition that when an important event happens, we make an offering on an altar to our ancestors and tell them what has happened. The wife went to the market to buy flowers, fruits, and other provisions for an offering to place on the altar. The father stayed home with his son and tried to persuade the little boy to call him Daddy. But the little boy refused. He said, "Mister, you aren't my daddy. My daddy is someone else. He used to come and visit us every night. Whenever he came, my mother would talk to him for a long time and cry and cry. When my mother sat down, the man sat down. When my mother lay down, he also lay down. So you are not my daddy." Hearing these words, the young father's heart turned to stone. He could no longer smile. He became silent. When his wife returned, the man didn't look at her or speak to her anymore. He was very cold. He acted as though he despised her. She didn't understand why, and she began to suffer deeply. After the ceremony to make an offering to the ancestors, it's traditional to take the offering from the altar, and then the family sits down and enjoys the meal with happiness. But after the young man performed the offering, he didn't do this. He left the house. He went into the village and spent his time in the liquor shop. He got drunk because he couldn't bear his suffering. When the husband came home, it was very late. He did the same thing every evening. He never talked to his wife, never looked at her, never ate at home. The young lady suffered so much she couldn't bear it. And on the fourth day, she jumped into the river and drowned. The evening after the funeral, the young father and the boy came home. As the man lit the kerosene lamp, the little boy shouted, "Here's my father!" and pointed to the shadow of his father on the wall. It turned out that the young woman used to talk to her shadow every night because she missed her husband so much. One day, the little boy had said, "Everyone in the village has a father. Why don't I have one?" In order to calm the little boy, she pointed to her shadow that night on the wall and said, "There is your father." Of course, when she sat down, the shadow would sit down too. Now the young father understood. His wrong perception had been wiped away, but it was too late. What if the young man had gone to his wife and asked, "Darling, I've suffered so much the last few days, I don't think I can survive. Please help me. Please tell me who is that person who used to come every night and with whom you talked and cried?" That's a very simple thing to do. If he had done this, the young lady would have had a chance to explain. The tragedy would have been averted, and they would have recovered their happiness very easily. That's the direct way. But he didn't do this because he was so deeply hurt, and his pride prevented him from going to her and asking for help. The woman suffered so much as well. She was deeply hurt because of her husband's behavior, but she didn't ask for his help. Perhaps if she'd asked her husband what was wrong, he would have told her that their son had what her son had said, but she didn't because she too was caught in pride. A wrong perception can be the cause of a lot of suffering. All of us are subject to misunderstanding. We live with wrong perceptions every day. That's why we have to practice meditation and looking deeply into the nature of our perceptions. Whatever we perceive, we have to ask ourselves, are you sure your perception is right? To be safe, you have to ask. We are subject to many wrong perceptions in our daily lives. It may be that the other person didn't have the intention to hurt you. Mindful communication has the potential to ease so much of the unnecessary suffering in our relationships.